It is finally that time of year in football. The Champions League is back. Obviously, a few days ago, there was the Champions League draw where they pick 4 different teams from 4 separate pots and put them all into separate groups, and these groups will be the Champions League group stages. Now, today's video is not going to be my predictions for which teams are going to finish at the top or at the bottom of each of these groups. Instead, I'm just going to be overviewing each of these groups, talking about each of the teams, talking about which group is the hardest group, the group of death, and which groups are fairly easy. And I'm just going to be going over a quick summary of each of the groups. So without further ado, let's get right into this video. The first group I'm going to talk about is none other than Group A, and the teams in Group A are Bayern Munich, Manchester United, FC Copenhagen, and Galatasaray. Honestly, in my opinion, there isn't too much to say about this group. It is fairly obvious which 2 teams are going to be the dominant teams and which 2 teams are going to struggle a little bit. In my opinion, Bayern Munich are one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team in the world, especially with their new additions, Kim Min-jae, Rafael Guerrero, and especially Harry Kane. Last season, the main thing they needed in their team, in my opinion, was maybe a little bit more squad depth, but especially a striker, because with the loss of Lewandowski, they obviously needed a replacement for him, and Harry Kane is the perfect replacement. One of the best strikers in the world, a veteran, played amazingly throughout his whole career in the Premier League, and I think this season with Bayern Munich, he and the whole team are going to have an incredible UCL run. Manchester United are obviously favorites to get second place in this group. They do have a good team, but in the Premier League this season so far, they've been struggling a little bit, if I'm being honest. They've dropped a few points where really they shouldn't have. And I think Galatasaray have made some great signings this summer. I do think that Galatasaray could possibly pull off an upset against a team like Manchester United. It could happen. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm not giving out my predictions, but I'm just saying it could happen. And as for Copenhagen, to be honest, I think they are the odd ones out in this group. And I do think that they probably have the worst team. Let's move on from Group A and let's go right into Group B. And in this group, we have Sevilla, Arsenal, PSV, and Lens. Now, I do feel like this group is very, very balanced, aside from the one standout team, which is the Premier League side, Arsenal. Obviously, last season, they had an incredible season in the Premier League. They just did bottle it in the last few games, but they are an incredible side. And this summer, they made some incredible signings that will really help them out in this Champions League campaign. They signed players like Timber, Declan Rice. They also signed the goalkeeper, David Raya. And they did also sign Havertz. But to be honest, with Havertz, we have yet to see if he was worth it or not. Nonetheless, I do think that Arsenal are the best team in this group. But with the others, Sevilla, PSV, and Lens, I feel like they are all very close in ability, and I think it's going to be a real battle between these 3 teams. Sevilla obviously have started off this season horribly, and to be fair, even last season they did finish in the bottom half of the La Liga. But in the Champions League, in the Europa League, they are a different level of team. They are just absolutely crazy. They strive for these competitions, and I do think that they could give Arsenal a run for their money in this group. Moving on to the third group, which is Group C, we have Napoli, Real Madrid, Braga, and Union Berlin. Now, in my opinion, this is a very entertaining group. Obviously, I do support Napoli, and they are in my opinion, a fairly tough group with Real Madrid, Braga, and Union Berlin. Real Madrid, on the other hand, are definitely the favorites to make it out of this group. They are one of the best teams in the world. Their new addition, Jude Bellingham, is absolutely insane. 4 games, 5 goals, and 1 assist. He's already gotten 2 game winners in the first few games at Real Madrid, and he's looking like one of the best midfielders in the world. And even though they did lose some key players, like obviously they lost Benzema, they lost Courtois to an injury, they also lost Eder Militao, I do think that their team is still the best in this group, and they will probably finish at the top. In my opinion, Napoli are definitely favorites to get second place in this group, but I do think that their team has dropped down a small level compared to last season. And obviously last season they did win the Scudetto, but in the Champions League they did fall short to AC Milan. But I think any of these teams, Braga or even Union Berlin, could give Napoli a run for the money, especially Union Berlin. They have started off the season very good in the Bundesliga. Obviously last season they finished near the top of the Bundesliga, which was very surprising to a lot of people. But the one thing that could hold Union Berlin back is that I heard rumors that they are not going to be allowed to play in their home stadium. Now, I don't know why, 100%. I'm not sure why they're not going to be able to play in their home stadium, but they will have to play in another stadium, and this could really affect them. And for that reason, I don't know if they're going to perform that well in this group. Moving on from Group C, let's get right into Group D. And in this group, we have Benfica, Inter, Salzburg, and Real Sociedad. To be honest, in my opinion, this group is similar to Group B. I don't know who's going to finish first. I don't know who's going to finish second, who's going to finish at the bottom. Now, historically, there are two teams that should finish at the top half, which are Benfica and Inter Milan. Both of these teams have made a few good transfers this summer, and they are looking like the favorites to make it out of this group. But honestly, I wouldn't write off both Salzburg and Real Sociedad, because I feel like they are always underrated teams in the Champions League, but they always end up performing well, pick up maybe 1 or 2 wins, get a couple draws, and they might possibly make it out of the group. So honestly, with this group, I really don't know, and it could go down to the last game possibly. Moving on to Group E, in my opinion, this is a very strange group. We have Feyenoord, Atletico Madrid, Lazio, and Celtic. Now, in my opinion, the one team that stands out as the worst team in this group is Celtic. Honestly, I don't see any way that they're going to make it out of this group. Now, it would be nice for them to advance, but personally, I just don't see it happening. But I do think that the battle between the other 3 teams, Lazio, Atletico Madrid, and Feyenoord, is going to be an insane battle. All 3 of these teams have some of the most passionate fans in the whole world, and I think that any of these games are going to be incredibly entertaining. Honestly, I feel like any of these 3 teams could realistically make it out of the group. I do think that both Atletico Madrid and Lazio are the favorites, but you would never write off Feyenoord because their fans and their team is absolutely incredible. They have one of the best teams in the Netherlands, and honestly, I have no clue who's going to make it out. I have nothing else to say. Like, it could be any of these teams. Like, realistically, it could be any of these teams. And I do think that all of these games are going to be very low scoring games, a lot of draws, a lot of 0-1 games. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to the very last game. Some games are going to come down to the very last minute. And these games are going to be very entertaining, in my opinion. The next group we got is Group F. And this group is regarded as the group of death. Every single year in the Champions League, I always feel like there's one group that has generally the hardest teams compared to all the other groups. And this year, it is the Group F. We got PSG, Dortmund, AC Milan, and Newcastle. Crazy teams in this group. The games in this group are going to be so entertaining because everybody knows that this is the group of death. And realistically, these teams are going to be fighting their hardest to make it out of the group, because these teams realistically could all make it to the quarterfinals, possibly even the semifinals. And I think that all of these games are going to be incredibly entertaining. The one team that I feel like is almost at a level below all the other teams is definitely Borussia Dortmund. They haven't had the best start to the season, and in their first few games, it looks like they're having a little bit of trouble scoring goals. So for that reason, I do think that they're going to fall back a little bit in this group. But between Newcastle, AC Milan, and PSG, honestly, I have no clue who's going to win. All 3 of the rest of these teams in this group, PSG, AC Milan, and Newcastle, have made some incredible signings this summer. And they all have fairly new teams compared to what they were playing with in the last few seasons. And honestly, I think it's going to be very entertaining. I could see a lot of games going down to the last minute, maybe a lot of high scoring games, I feel like. And honestly, I have no clue who's going to advance in this group. We could see some upsets. We could see some potential favorites finishing at the bottom of the group. Honestly, I don't know. But that's why this group is called the Group of Death. Definitely some games to look out for. Moving on to Group G, the 4 teams we have are Manchester City, Leipzig, Crvena Zvezda, and Young Boys. And I don't even have to say anything about this group because there's one main team, and it is Manchester City. Most people will probably have Man City as favorites to win this UCL, and to be honest, once again, they've gotten arguably the easiest group out of all the groups. I don't have to say much about Manchester City. Their team is absolutely phenomenal. Yes, they did recently lose Kevin De Bruyne to an injury, but honestly, it doesn't really matter. They are 100% going to make it out of this group at the top. There's honestly no doubt in my mind that they are not going to finish at the top. They definitely will. For the other 3 teams in this group, I do think that Leipzig are probably the best out of these 3. Crvena Zvezda have obviously had some great runs in the past, and same with Young Boys. I remember just a couple years ago, they beat Manchester United, but I don't see any of these other teams topping this group. Obviously, Manchester City will definitely just absolutely obliterate all these teams, and I do think that Leipzig are probably favorites to finish in second place. The final group we got in this year's Champions League draw is Group H, and in this group we have Barcelona, Porto, Shakhtar Donetsk, and also Royal Antwerp. In my opinion, this is another one of those groups where it's kind of, I don't want to say anything like disrespectful, but I don't feel like any of these teams are going to really make it far in this year's Champions League. Obviously, Barcelona is an incredible team in history and in the present, but honestly, I don't see them making it far in the Champions League. I do see them making out of this group because they are definitely the best team. Obviously, they are one of the best teams in the La Liga. They've not had the most convincing start to the season, but with some of their new signings that they made over the summer, they do definitely look like the best team in this group. Porto, on the other hand, I always feel like are a very slept-on club in the Champions League. Each year, they always make it fairly far, and I think this season, against Shakhtar Donetsk and also Antwerp, they probably look like the second best team in this group. But honestly, I wouldn't write off Shakhtar because every year when they're in the Champions League, they always overperform compared to expectations, and sometimes they do cause upsets. And you never know, they could possibly make it out of this group. I'm not saying it's impossible. It is unlikely, but it is possible for them to make it out of this group. And as for Antwerp, if I'm being 100% honest, I don't really see them doing much in this group. Yes, they could pull off an upset or two, but I feel like the other teams in this group are just a level above them, if I'm being 100% honest. And that is the end of this video where I reviewed all the Champions League groups from the Champions League draw for 2023-24 season. This Champions League draw has given us some incredible groups, especially Group F, the group of death. Watch out for these games because they're going to be incredibly entertaining, and honestly, I have no idea who's going to go through. If you guys are excited to finally watch more Champions League football, remember to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you guys want to see more Champions League content, stay tuned on this channel because I'll be uploading loads and loads of UCL content throughout this year. So stay tuned for more videos.